Hi there. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games, which this season is Dungeons and Dragons. Our guest today is Ed Stark. Ed has been in the gaming industry even longer than I have. One of the first people I got to be friends with in the industry. I'm so excited that he's here. And I know for a fact that he's a great storyteller and has some great games. So you're going to have a blast today listening to us reminisce about the good old days. So, Ed, thank you for being here with us.
Oh, Peter, thanks. Oh, it's so good to be back together, even over the internet. Just talking about my favorite subject. Gaming. Well, and me, I guess no,
You is your favorite subject?
no. Well, you'll have to stop me. As I understand it, we only got an hour, and there's so
I
much to talk
know.
about.
I know. Okay, so right off the bat, I need to jump into the question of your name because I knew you as Ted, and then
Yeah.
somebody call you Ed, and always it was Ed or Ted, which is it? And every time we talk to you, you just say, "Yeah, whichever, I don't care." But now I see on your Facebook page it says Ed, so I think that's the answer. Where did the Ted come from?
Well, so my father's name was also Edward Stark, but he had a different middle name than I did. But it was confusing around the house, I guess. So my parents, right from the start, started calling me by a nickname, Ted. Apparently, I looked like some old uncle or whatever who I never actually met, and his name was Ted. Uh, so they called me Ted. And when I went to school, and in kindergarten, they give you the little name tag, that says your name. They gave me a name tag that said Ed. And I got in a fight with my kindergarten teacher right on the first day saying, "No, my name's Ted. What are you talking
Ed.
about?" And they had to prove to me my name was Ed. Uh, and so growing up, all my friends, all my family knew me as Ted. And then when I started teaching, I was Mr. Stark because I started teaching. I was an English teacher for a few years.
Right,
And
right.
and then when I got into the game industry, I was like, well, what do I want my credits to be? And how do I want to get my checks? All that those gaming millions when they all start rolling in and they're backing the truck up.
Right, right, right.
How do you sign that check? And I'm like, well, my driver's license says Ed, so I better go with that. And so when I started at West End Games, I was working on Paranoia and Torg, new shirt Torg,
Woohoo.
and Star Wars and a bunch of other games. Um, I had them call me Ed. And so everybody at West End knew me as Ed.
Well,
And
and
then
oh yeah, go ahead.
oh
Sorry.
and then the next step of gaming hiring, the nepotism started, and I
Yeah,
started hiring my friends because I knew I could depend on them to write games and
yeah,
do stuff. And so several of my friends joined the company, and they all knew me as Ted. So they were
right,
calling me Ted.
right. And isn't there a version with an apostrophe in it
Yep.
too?
When I
Like
moved
just
when I when I
the
moved to TSR, one of the creative directors, a wonderful woman named Andrea Hayday,
oh yes, of
uh,
course.
she would ask me, "What do you prefer, Ed or Ted?" Because I keep hearing people call them one. And I eventually just said to her, "Look, I don't care." And she said, "Well, you got to make a decision." I said, "Well, I'm not making a decision." And she said, "Okay, I'm going to call you to Ed."
To
And so
Ed.
about a third of the people I knew started calling me to Ed.
Perfect.
And I think it was
Perfect.
a play on Mark Reinhagen. Remember when he had that little
Oh yeah,
dot
right.
music?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I think
Ryan
that's where she got it.
Hagen. Yep, I remember that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, it was a play on that. And this was funny right up until I got a writing credit that said to Ed.
Yeah, that wasn't so funny anymore.
It wasn't so funny anymore. So professionally, I pretty much still go as Ed Stark, but I love it when people
Well,
call me Ted because it reminds me that they're friends I've had for years.
at least it's not Ned, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I get that. I write a
Okay.
check. I write a check, or I give somebody my card, and they're like, you know, Game of Thrones or Tony Stark. Are you related to Tony Stark? You know,
Oh, oh my
and it's
God.
like, and I have come up with some pretty snippy responses to a bunch of those. But depending on how people ask it, I give them the funny responses or snippy ones. So,
All right. All
but
right. Well, let's okay, we got that settled. I finally have the
yep.
full story on your name, Ted Ed to Ed.
Anybody watching
Ted.
this can call me
Yeah.
Ted if they want. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. All right. So, before we get up into D&D years, I want to get a little bit of background of who is Ed Stark. Not what is the name Ed or Ted, but like the person behind the name. Like where were you raised? Where were you born? What was your early years?
Okay.
Uh
Well, I was born in New York State, but moved very very quickly. Like before I could actually move, I think I was moved by my parents to northeastern Pennsylvania, a small town called Montrose. And Montrose was kind of a farming community, but it was very close to Binghamton, New York, where IBM, Singer Link, or whatever. So there was a tech industry, there was college nearby, and so when I grew up, I was a voracious reader. I was an athlete. I like to just do things. And when I heard about Dungeons and Dragons, when it first came out, I bugged my parents to buy me a copy. I'm like, oh, please, you got to find this copy. And
Yeah,
somehow
of
in
course.
rural Pennsylvania, they found a copy. They got me a copy of the old blue box that had the counters in it and no dice. If you remember that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
And I was
I
like, my
do. I
my
do. Yeah.
family my family plays board games, and so they'll play this board game with me. And I cracked open the rules. I'm like, this isn't like a normal board game,
Yeah, I know.
you know.
When I had nobody to teach me, I tried to figure it out from the rules, and I got to
Mhm,
admit, I was stumped. Like I was really stumped. It wasn't until I ran the game. I was DMing a
mhm,
game. I
mhm.
ran characters all the way up to like fifth level, and I still didn't really kind of grasp the fundamental idea. I was playing it like a board game. It wasn't
Yeah,
until I played in somebody else's campaign, and he started opening scene. Well, you're in a bar, and this guy climbs up on a table and says, "My rants about orcs kind of problem," and I'm like, "Oh, now I get it.
yeah.
Wow, this is really cool."
Well, I
Yeah.
I was very lucky because I was reading the books in study hall back before anybody cared whether you're looking at this. Both of us predate the Mothers Against D&D and all that stuff.
Right.
And I'm reading a book, and a guy I knew, he wasn't really a close friend at the time, came up to me and he's like, "Oh, do you play Dungeons and Dragons?" And I was like, "Well, I just got the set. I haven't played it yet." And and he goes, "Well, I've played a couple of times. Want me to come over and we can play together?" It's like, "Yeah, that'd be great. Come over this weekend." So I had come over, and he brought dice.
Yeah.
And I was
Oh,
like,
oh,
his
oh,
his
yeah.
name was Mike, and Mike had dice, and I was like, "Whoa, this is awesome!" And so we started playing. We played one on one. We created characters, and
Right.
sometimes he DM, sometimes I DM. We'd create whole parties. Like I had these four characters that with these horrible names and everything, and
Nice.
and and we would go out on little one off adventures, and then his big brother, who didn't play much but was involved with some juniors and seniors in high school, and they'd started playing, so we ended up going into their game, and then when they graduated we started up our own game, and that was how we got into role playing and D&D and everything, and we played everything we could find, like not just
Yeah.
D&D, but just
Yeah.
anything
So
new that came out.
right. So, but your first job in the RPG industry wasn't at TSR working on D&D.
No,
It was at West End Games, which why don't you remind people who West like a lot of people these days might not know who West End Games was. It
sure.
was really really an important company back in the day.
Oh
And
yeah.
and then how did you get there and what did you do?
Well, West End Games was started by a guy named Scott Palter, who
Yeah.
unfortunately passed away last year. But he started it kind of as a hobby. His family ran a shoe import company, and they had enough money that he started up his game company, and they made some really terrific tabletop games, war games mostly. And they operated out of New York. That's where the name came from, West End of New York, West End Games.
Oh, okay.
and
Right.
and
Sure.
they had like games like Imperium Romanum and a bunch of other classic war games. Your grognards will be really familiar with. But at a certain point, Greg Gostickian and Eric Goldberg, who worked there, decided they wanted to get into role playing, and they published. And again, I'm not exactly sure on how every timeline fits together, but they published a game called Paranoia, which is
Yep.
still around. Great,
Famous
great
game.
game, famous game.
Famous game has its very important position in the history of
Yeah.
role playing.
Oh yeah. And then back in the mid to late '80s, they got a hold of a little license called Star Wars. And at the time, the only things being published for Star Wars was the Marvel comics, and they were on their way out. Kind of, there was nothing. The three
Right.
movies were
Right.
done. There was nothing. So they got um, they got the license pretty cheap, and it was a pretty comprehensive license. They did some board games, some of which were pretty good, and they did a lightsaber dueling pack. But they did the role playing game, and they were one of the first games, if not the first game, to do color in games, because they picked up a lot of artwork from the movies.
Oh,
and
right. Sure.
and this of course was not, back when we didn't really have computer captures and stuff. This was a big deal. It was difficult. And so they put out the Star Wars role-playing game, and that gave them some confidence and some money to play with the big boys. The company moved to Pennsylvania, and to save some money. Eric and Greg left the company. Bill Slavisek, who I know and kind of took over there. And this is how I sort of got into it. I was working as a teacher. I had studied to be an English teacher, and I was on my way to becoming an English teacher when my now wife, but then girlfriend's father, said, "Hey, you're into this gaming stuff. There's an ad for a game company called West End Games. They want an editor. You should do that." Because he knew how much I like games. And I was, like, well, yeah.
So you had a relative, you actually had a relative suggest to you that you go work at a game company. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
See, that's the opposite. When I started Wizards, I worked at Boeing for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then when Magic the Gathering came out, and it was obvious it was going to be a hit, I quit my job at Boeing so I could work full-time at Wizards. And I told my dad, and he was so upset at me that it's just the opposite. He's like, you left a big company with 401k and a pension plan and health benefits to go off and start a game company.
If it makes you feel any better, I spent 4 years in college, and then I think I may have lost you there. Okay. So I spent 4 years in college and then 2 years in graduate school getting a couple of master's degrees, and then went off to the well-paying game industry. And basically I interviewed with Bill. And who, you back? Oh, okay.
Sorry, everybody. I was booted off for some reason for a moment, but I'm back with a vengeance. I'm sorry, Bill. Please continue.
I just kept blathering on. So
good.
But basically,
a real pro.
I interviewed with Bill Slavisek, who was the head of the content department at that time, and he was like, hey, I think you could do a good job, but you still got 3 months before you graduate, and I need somebody now. So I was like, okay, well, I'll check back if this teaching thing doesn't pan out. So I went back, finished my degree, started actually teaching, substitute teaching and things like that. And then about a year later, I got a call from West End Games, and they said, "Hey, we got your resume still. Would you like to come in for an interview?" I was like, "Sure." So I come in for an interview, and I get the job. And I'm like, "Oh, great! I'm going to get to work with the Bill guy who I really liked, and work on stuff." Turns out Bill had left the company, and they hired me and another guy named Bill Smith to basically fill in and do his job. So I ended up coming off the street and becoming the Paranoia line editor, and working on the Torg role-playing game, and doing a little bit of Star Wars stuff. And spent several years there working with Greg Gordon and a bunch of other people. West End Games, for anybody who doesn't remember, was very small. I think at our largest, we were 13 people.
Right.
It was never a big company, but we put out up to 3 products a month, and we had a schedule that was so reliable that we could sell in the book chains, which was a big deal back then.
Right.
But that's how I got to meet you. You can't see my point, because the sales manager there, who's another friend of mine who got hired in, Bill Olmsdahl, he and I used to travel around and basically be our marketing department. We would load up our truck with all the product we could, and we'd go to any convention we could get to. The only conventions we were allowed to fly to were Gen Con, Origins, when we couldn't drive to it, and the Gamma Trade Show. And I always remember we would be, back in the early 90s, we'd be in one of those little one booth islands.
Right.
We'd be there, and you'd be there with Talislanta, and eventually a little game called Magic. Which was awesome. That kind of catapulted you out of the one game thing. And we'd be there with White Wolf. Before they really had launched Vampire.
The bad boys of the industry right there.
Right. And it was so much fun, because we all were excited about what TSR was doing. We always kind of saw them as the behemoth. We're like, we got to
yeah.
take on the behemoth. We got to
Right.
attack the castle.
Yeah, we were the serfs, you know. TSR
Right.
in those days had a big castle in the middle of the exhibit hall, and everybody else was like smaller. Nobody could have a taller booth than them, and all
that
stuff.
was a law. That was a rule. I mean, anybody who doesn't know this, Peter's not kidding. That was actually a rule.
Yeah.
And remember how FASA got around that?
I know they put a big piece of art like on cloth and hung it on the side of the wall, and it was gigantic. It was amazing. Like back in those days, I remember the first Gen Con I went to, and that was on the wall, and I couldn't believe it. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. This is why it's Gen Con. And keep up in the game ever since. But yeah.
And there were people at TSR who were not happy about that. I can tell you, it was funny. But TSR used to put on such a good show. Anyway, it was still a lot of fun to go to Gen Con. Even as a serf, it was fun to go and hang around and run games. And my first exposure to Gen Con was actually, not going. It was through Dragon Magazine. When I was like, 14, 15 years old, I had a
Oh my God, you're going to tell the same story I have. Go ahead. Was filling out the event regs?
Yes. They had the event registration in Dragon, and my friends and I would sit around and go, oh, if we could only go to Gen Con, if we would only go to Milwaukee.
Yes.
And I think back to myself, and I'm like, maybe when I was like 16 or 17, I bet if I really wanted to, I probably could have talked my parents into letting me go if I'd saved up the money. But I always thought, oh, it's just it's too far. I'm never really.
I lived in Seattle. It was way far for me, right?
Yeah.
And we were poor. I mean, we didn't have money to do stuff like that. But I would fill it out every year. I would fill out my wish list of what events I wanted to play in at Gen Con. I would date it and everything, but then I just wouldn't mail it.
Yeah. Well, and remember they used to put out the tournament adventures. They would, back when Dragon would publish adventures. We actually ran a tournament adventure for my friends. I actually had kind of two gaming groups, one that I gamed with regularly and one group of people who game with occasionally. And I matched them up and I said, okay, I'm going to run this for you two groups, and whoever does it best gets a prize. I don't remember what the prize was, some stupid thing I had in my closet or whatever, but I ran the game and I scored the points. It's like, okay, you guys got 96 points. You guys only got 84. So you guys win. You're the champions this year of the Gen Con tournament.
Oh my God. That's awesome. That's great. So I got to reminisce about how my first memory, it wasn't when we first met, but it's a very vivid memory for me of when we met in 1993 at Origins. And for the first time, we had magic cards that we could show to the public. We didn't have packaging. It was an accident that we had them. It was cards off the press that just happened to arrive the day that I got there. And so I was showing them to people, and you got a bunch of cards, and you and Bill Almstall, bless his soul. I hear he passed last year. Yeah. But you two got a bunch of cards, went off and played it. And you came back raving about it, how good this game was. And for me, it was one of the first times somebody in the industry saw the game and liked it. And that was such an important thing for me because, like every game company, we were up there, drinking the Kool-Aid, thinking, yeah, of course, this game's great. We love it. But will anybody else like it? You always have that doubt. And so I always remembered that and was very thankful that you were able, but it wasn't a sense that people were competitors back then. In those days, I mean, I don't really know what the publishing the world is like that much right now because I'm kind of away from publishing. But all of us companies, for the most part, we all got along. We all played each other's games. We all hung out at the same bars and restaurants, and we would go off. Remember when we used to always trade products at conventions?
Oh yeah,
too? Like, hey,
oh my
I'll give
God,
you some magic cards for the latest Torg.
Oh God, yeah. No, I remember Bill and I used to actually pack extra product that we put off to the side for people. And one of my memories of us is actually, I think, one of our first meetings. It was at the Gamma Trade Show in Vegas. I think we were in the Tropicana at the time. It was before they settled into the Orleans.
All right. Yeah. I remember the Trop.
Yeah. And I remember you were wearing a suit.
I was new. New.
No, but the thing was, that impressed me because our sales manager, before Bill, a guy named Fitzroy Bonterre, really nice guy, he would always wear a suit when we would go to conventions, and I wore a nice shirt and stuff, dressed up, but I don't even know if I owned a suit at the time. But the thing that impressed me so much was you would talk, just like you were just talking now about how excited you were about games, and you would talk about, oh, did you go by the GW booth? Did you see this, or GDW or FOSSA, or did you see that? When we'd hang out at the bars and stuff later. But then you also talked about like some of the business things. And I think you may have been the first person, I don't know if you use these exact phrase, but to sum up what I always thought about the game industry, even as a newbie, was that the idea of the rising tide floating all boats. Because we did kind of root for each other. I mean, I know there were business people who are like, oh no, we got to do better than them, and that sort of thing. But I think a lot of us saw the idea that if people are gaming, even if they're not playing my game, then they will eventually.
Yeah, there was something magical about that era of the gaming history. So hey, we are like a third of the way through the hour. We haven't even gotten to Dungeons and Dragons yet. So we got to scratch the next 10 stories and jump to. You got to tell how the heck did you end up at TSR working on the granddaddy of them all, Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, I'll keep the transition short, but basically when I was at West End, when I was at West End, I became kind of the lead designer when Greg Gordon left. I designed several games and wrote some novels and much stuff. But the thing was, I was just doing a crazy amount of work because I would make more money doing freelance than I would at the company. And I was like, this is no way to live. I gotta settle down a little bit. And so I put in an application at TSR, and I knew a few people there. And they brought me out for an interview, and I wore a suit then. I remember that because they only flew me out for the day. They flew me out at like
you started wearing them when I stopped wearing them, right?
Yeah. No, this was in '95, I think. They flew me out for the day.
I was still wearing suits then.
And I'm wearing a suit, and I show up, and Tim Brown was the head of the creative department at that time. Jim Ward, I think, was the VP, but Tim was like the lead designer.
Sounds about right.
He brought me into his office, and he had this nice big desk, and on one corner of the desk was a stack, like, well, you can't see it, but a stack a couple of feet high of all the books I had worked on at West End.
Oh, wow.
And that just impressed the hell out of me. A couple of box sets and novels. Right. And I was like, holy cow, what the hell are you punishing yourself for, man? I don't even read all that stuff. But he comes in. We start talking. He starts talking about TSR and what they're doing and why they're hiring and all this other stuff. And about 15 minutes into it, and again, I flew out at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning at this point. He goes, so do you think you could start like in March? And I'm like, did we skip something? And I'm like, well, I mean, I have to talk to my wife. And he offers me, and again, put this in perspective, he offers me little more than twice the salary I was making at West End, which wasn't that much, but it still was pretty good. It's definitely better. And he said I could still do freelance if I wanted. And I was like, I was ready to just say yes on the spot, but fortunately, I wanted to tell my wife, Jill, how she would probably react too well to that.
Hey, honey, we're moving to Lake Geneva.
And then we spent the next 7 hours just meeting people and wandering around. And they took me out to lunch. I'm sitting here wearing a suit, and they go, you want to go out to lunch? Yeah. Where do you want to go? I don't know. I don't know any of the places in Lake Geneva. He goes, how about we go to Popeyes? I was like, Popeyes? I was like, I mean, I'm going to say yes, no matter what they say. But it turns out Popeyes wasn't the fast food restaurant. There was a guy who had this big, nice restaurant on the lake, and it just happened to be called Popeyes. And so we went there and everything. But I was like, really? Are we doing that? But yeah. So anyway, I ended up joining TSR. They gave me a position in the Worlds group. And then after I got there, they told me I was the lead designer in the Worlds group, which was like, oh, okay. All right.
You have a track record of this, right? You get hired and get promoted right into management, right?
Yeah. Well,
Ed, Ed, I mean, to Ed, you're a nice guy. What can we say? I mean, you're somebody that people just immediately like and think, hey, this guy, let's stick him with a hard job.
Well, it was funny because the Worlds group at the time was doing Birthright, which Rich Baker and Colin had just released.
And Tony Sudlow did the cover art for it.
Oh my God, I was so great because I got to work with Tony, and he did all my covers.
Yeah,
and basically, I would go to Tony and I would say, I kind of was thinking something like this. And you know, the art order was like one line. And he would just go off and he'd do these amazing covers.
Right.
But yeah, I got to work on Birthright, Planescape, uh, Ravenloft, and usually a bunch of other stuff because always some
Now,
group needed help.
when you say worked on, what do you mean? Are you like writing
Yeah.
adventures? Are you writing core rules or
Well,
what?
usually we would, at the time, TSR had a fairly stable pool of freelancers. And we
Okay.
usually had the in-house designers do like the big books. Like I did like the big region areas for Birthright, like Havens of the Great Bite. Like think about it as like a mini campaign setting. So
Right.
the in-house designers would usually do that. And then our freelancers, we would usually contract to do like the smaller stuff like an adventure. We would send them the source material and say, hey, you do this. And then a designer, like somebody like myself, would review the stuff and we'd kick it over to an editor. The editor would develop it and we move on. It was funny because at West End, like I said, we'd put out like 3 products a month, which means I had about 4 weeks to do a book, like 160, 180 page book, didn't matter, just you got 4 weeks. At TSR, they gave us a month for every module unit, which was about 32 pages.
32 pages, right.
And I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of this time? So I got involved in helping, Harold Johnson and a bunch of other people do like Gen Con demos. And I got, like you said, I kind of segued into some management stuff. And, I got basically became kind of a helper guy, which
right.
When it came as a kind of a surprise when back in, I guess it was late 96 when they had the big layoff, I got laid off in December, the day before Christmas vacation. They laid off about like half the staff.
This horrible habit that companies have of doing layoffs at Christmas.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I'm guilty of it too. I did it. It all links back to the annual budgeting cycle. And it always seems to be about, sometime around Thanksgiving that companies figure out, oh shit, we don't have enough money, gotta lay people off. And
it was
horrible
terrible
way to start the holidays.
It was terrible. Well, yeah, and the thing was, we all knew something was happening, and we figured about Thanksgiving, we figured, if we can make it to Christmas, then maybe we're gonna be okay. And we had the Christmas party, and we had one more day before Christmas vacation, and we thought we had the Christmas party, we made it, we're gonna be fine. Right. And the next day, they started laying people off, including the guy who played Santa Claus at the Christmas party, which is terrible. But here's the thing. I go home. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. Because I didn't have like savings to speak of. I'd just been paying off debt from working at West End. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And I get ready to call the unemployment agency. But I'm like, I got to talk to my wife first. So I call her. She was working in childcare at the time and couldn't talk. But I had to tell her, what had happened. She was going to call me back. So I'm waiting for her to call me back. Phone rings, and it's Harold Johnson on the line. Harold had been my boss at TSR.
Yeah, Harold. Yeah, I know him well. He was our guest just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, wonderful man. And I'll always owe him for this. And I'll always tell this story anytime again. He calls me up and he says, will you come back? I said, what? He said, I went down to Lorraine's office and I said, if she's going to lay you off, she might as well lay off the entire Worlds group. And I'm like, well, don't do that. and he said, well, but it's true. We wouldn't have a designer. We wouldn't be able to do anything. What's the point?
Right.
And I said, well, yeah, I'll come back. I mean, pride is one thing, but I need a paycheck. And so I had to wait around for Jill to call back. She's in tears. I call her back. I tell her, okay, I'm going back to work. I explain it to her. I drive back. They've already had the survivors meetings. They've already had the meeting where they tell everybody who's still there, okay, you've still got a job, we got to get back to work and everything, so take the rest of the day and figure it out and then go on vacation. Merry Christmas. And so I'm walking around and I basically have to tell this story to everybody there.
Yeah.
And then I run into Sue Wineline.
Right.
And she
who will be our guest in 2 weeks.
And she is pretty much in tears because she and her then husband, Monty, we're going to have a Christmas party that night. She asks me, what should I do? Should I cancel this Christmas party?
Oh,
I said, you can't, people are going to want to grieve and they're going to want to talk to each other. They're going to know, the people who got laid off are going to want to know that they've got friends.
You just got to rebrand it.
Yeah. And so we come back and have a party, and it goes about the way you would expect, although, it was a really good thing. But again, I have to tell this story of, no, I didn't actually get laid off, to all the people now who did. And so that felt pretty crappy.
Oh my God, what a cluster.
Yeah. So let's fast forward.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
We spent,
but
yeah.
But to put this in context, the challenges that TSR was having in the winter of '96, these layoffs this is part of the same story that leads to them eventually having to Lorraine eventually having to sell the company. I mean, her misfortune, my fortune, but it's kind of the beginning of the end, if you will, for TSR. So so we got to get up to the Wizards portion, but just kind of quickly, anything you want to say about the next few months? I mean, like, what'd you do for the next 7 months, something like that?
The next several months were tough. Most people just kind of wandered around the office. They came in, they always expected that was going to be the day that the doors were barred or whatever. Harold, however, kept the Worlds team moving. We kept working on the product that we had in our schedule. I wrote a couple of adventures. I'm not saying that we did a lot,
right?
But we got some stuff done. Bill Slavicek and his group were working on Alternity at the time, and that was a brand new thing. So they kept up ahead of steam. We kept up, I'd say, like 3/4 ahead of steam. We put about 3 or 4 products in the can, but nothing was getting published.
Yeah, no, I remember, because after we bought TSR, one of the kind of good things was that there was all this product that was ready to be released. Now, we didn't release all of it, but we released a lot of it, and it wasn't like because even though the company had so many problems, kept producing material, and so there was a lot to work with.
Well, the problems really, mostly weren't with the creative staff. They kept working. They worked hard, and like you said, Tony and the artists, and all our graphic designers and our editors and writers, they all kept working. But yeah, it was like a ghost town most of the time. And then we heard about the acquisition, and everybody, of course, was kind of battle scarred at the time. But the thing was, I heard it was you. I heard Peter Adkison, Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast, and of course, Legend of the Five Rings. I mean, I'm sure you've told that story a lot, but people knew I had met you and that we had interacted. So people would come into my office and ask, what's this going to be like? I'm like, I don't know what it's going to be like, but I know Peter, and I know Lisa, and I know a bunch of the other people, and they're all great. So my guess is it's going to be good.
And you mean Lisa Stevens,
Lisa Stevens,
right?
Yeah. Because Lisa, was one of the people I interacted with a lot, because she would also come with you to the conventions.
Great gal.
One of the things I always loved is, after you guys came out with Magic, she sent Bill and I display boxes as a thank you for playing the game, and I couldn't get over that. Bill and I played the hell out of those cards. We would play in his office when we would go on trips. We took the stuff when he came out to TSR. We kept playing.
Right.
Great, but yeah. So
the transition to Seattle, like what was that like for you?
So that was really interesting. I mean, you guys did a wonderful thing. You didn't just say to people, okay, move out to Seattle, you're on your own. No, I remember the team set up a budget. You flew us out there so we could look around ahead of time. People who didn't want to go, got to like get severance and everything, but people who did, it's like we had a budget, we were able to move out. The thing that was crazy in a way was merging the TSR environment and the Wizards environment. Two creative staffs that approached product and very different product very differently. I mean, I know that you guys did the role-playing game, Everway, and of course, way back when you'd done Talislanta and Primal Order and all that other stuff. But excuse me, TSR was used to a regular schedule. Everything came out, bing, 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 every month, several releases, things like that.
Right.
And whereas Wizards, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, had more of a, hey, we're going to develop something until we feel it's ready. We're going to have a target date in mind, but we're going to develop it until it's ready, and then we're going to put it out. And I mean, at least it felt that way. And we didn't know how to handle that.
I might quibble, but yeah, okay.
Well, it did feel.
We certainly had. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you how you're right. We always had a big long-term schedule, but we always had the nerve to delay something if we weren't happy with it. And so that happened, although, really didn't happen that much with Magic Gathering. It tended to happen with other support products or other game products or something like that. Magic was, starting in '93, Magic was the big revenue, until we got Pokemon. Magic was the biggest part of our revenue. And we had to have pretty tight releases. We were also selling into the book channel. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we had very we have good schedules for
Peter's cut off for me, so I'm going to keep talking though. I mean the big thing that I thought was helpful about TSR, what we were able to bring to the party, was that we did monthly releases, whereas Magic wasn't on like more of a quarterly schedule. You would have a big deck release, and then you would have an expansion. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to quibble about this, but
TSR, am I back, by the way?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, we excuse me. We kept working on product as we always had been, which was probably putting out way too much product, but putting it out regularly.
Right.
And one of the things that was really kind of cool about this is we had started working on third edition way back in TSR. That was always kind of, there were a few people always working on it. But then you kickstarted and said, hey, we got to get going. Third edition, it's time. It's been, 10, 12 years at the time. I mean, obviously it was 15 until we put it out. But I remember we had an actual kind of rule book. I wouldn't say a player's handbook, more like a here's the rules. And we all played it. And pretty much everybody kind of came back with, some people were excited about it, some people weren't. And those of us who weren't were kind of like, this is really just like second edition 2.2. It really wasn't that different. And and I remember you were less than satisfied with that. And that was when I believe, and again, you're better able to talk about this, but you appointed Jonathan Tweet to be the lead designer. And Bill asked me to be the creative director, which for people who don't know what that means, I was basically kind of like a producer, trying to make sure everybody had all the parts they needed. And so it was like Jonathan and Monty and Skip and Rich Baker, and then an editorial team, and later everybody. But I can still remember, spending, more than a year all working in little rooms, just coming up with what was going to be the next draft.
Right.
And that was so exciting. And it was so occasionally frustrating because I was also responsible for making sure that the team working on the second edition material kept moving.
Right.
That was where our RPG revenue was coming from.
Right.
It was decreasing.
Right.
But it was still there. We still had to do it. And so the team that was still working on second and the team that was working on third were kind of separate. And I felt like I was a little bit of a go-between. So I tried to get the second people to be able to play test stuff and the third people to be able to listen to the second people. And it's really kind of weird. I'm referring to people as third people and second people, and I'm getting confused myself. But
and didn't you help a lot in coordinating the play testing for third edition, if I remember right?
I like to think I did. Yeah. I worked with some of the people over in the RPGA and some of the people in organized play. Even that was something that Magic helped us with, is you had that great organized play group. You helped us do that. And then Jonathan, I remember, worked out a really great, really long survey we did, because I can't believe it, but we managed to keep third edition's development under wraps until we announced it. There were no leaks. And it's not like the internet didn't exist at the time. It wasn't the same as it is now, but we did not hear a peep out of the consumers. And we got
and there was a lot of them too. I mean, brought in, you were coordinating a lot of play testers. Like, I don't know, I'm thinking like hundreds of.
Yeah, we had hundreds of out-of-house play testers. And then the year of the big announcement, we brought in 100 RPGA top ranked people and sat them down a day before Gen Con. We actually, I believe the company housed them and everything, and we had all the creative staff running games for them to show them what it was. And then we got their things. And this was these steps were the most brilliant thing about the development of third edition, in my opinion. I mean, there were many brilliant things about the development, but these were brilliant in a completely different way, in that not only we get feedback, and I know of some things that changed dramatically, that, like, original draft paladins didn't have an alignment restriction. It just, I mean, that seems like a little thing, but our audience hated that. So Jonathan and the team said, okay, lawful good. We'll make another class that's like a paladin, but paladins are lawful good.
I can tell you a backstory on that.
Okay.
I'm the one that didn't want paladins to have an alignment. I was like, why are you? I mean, this is a warrior in service to a church, and the churches are all sorts of alignments. Why do only the lawful good churches get paladins? And so I had this thing like, no, we should have paladins to be any alignment. It's just a warrior in service to a church. And I think that I was so insistent on it. And Jonathan, I think, knew it was a bad idea. And so he said, okay, we'll leave it that. And we'll see what the playtesters think. Because he knew that the playtesters were going to say, no, it's a horrible idea.
Well, but that's one of the things that was the beauty of that process, because we let the data drive the answers. And, I did something a little unfair there. I immediately jumped to Jonathan as the lead designer. A lot of people don't remember this. You were the lead designer.
No. I was not the lead designer.
Well, when we went from the 2.2 version to third edition, you kind of, got the team together and got it started. And yes, you did turn over the reins, but remember, we used to have those like weekly and then monthly meetings in your office, and we'd run stuff. I remember having long talks about the skill system and how we were going to do skills. And,
I was way off on the wrong track with the skill system.
Yeah, it's funny because Jonathan had proposed a skill system, and I remember being very excited about it. That was more like what fifth edition has now, a level-based sort of thing. Right. And we should have gone with that.
Yeah, we should have. But I didn't like it. I didn't like it. So what happened is I appointed Jonathan as the lead designer, but I started running a once a week design meeting. Mm-hmm. And so once a week, I would get the whole design team in, and we would spend the whole it wasn't like a 1 hour meeting. It was a whole afternoon meeting. Yeah. We send couches out in the lounge, and we just talked mechanics the whole day. I gotta say, Ed, those meetings are like some of the best memories of my life. I just love being so hands-on in it. But I wasn't really qualified, other than I had an opinion about it. and it was my new toy. And so what would happen is, like, the skill system is a good example. I would say, no, it should be like this. So I would go off and I would design something that I thought would be good. And then Jonathan would take it and go, kind of like, oh my God. And then, but then he would see where I was going and what I wanted. And he would and we would agree on that. And then he would go and rewrite it, redesign it, so it was actually an elegant system. And that was just a lot of fun. Oh, but so I was just the guy that managed the design team. I didn't design it. I didn't. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is that's why I always kind of felt like I don't remember who it was, but somebody used the term the fifth Beatle, because after those meetings, I would get together with the team, maybe not right after it, and we would say, okay, well, what are we taking away from that? Jonathan would usually have something like, oh, and here's a system I think we could take from what we would talk about. These are the things that are the priorities, and these are the things that we can shelve for now, because I was always trying to, like, let's focus. Maybe we didn't focus enough, because if you remember when the Player's Handbook came out, all three of the books were supposed to be 224 pages.
I don't remember that.
Yep, that was well, I have to remember this production spec, but
yeah,
it's backwards, but signed by various design team members, including yourself. Right. But this was supposed to be 224 pages. That was the way we built. Oh, got character generation CD.
Yes, I remember it had the disc.
Yep. And it ended up being there's a 15-page appendix plus 286 pages. And I can tell you one thing: it wouldn't have been that, except we shrunk the spells type down to 9 point,
right?
Instead of the 11 point of the rest of the book, because we had to make it fit. And then Monty did similar sort of thing in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and Skip, by God, he was gonna fit that monster manual. So he managed to keep it to 224 by, if you remember, just running the monsters. We didn't stop for page breaks. We just went through. So we probably should have. But yeah, I mean, these books were incredible value, especially since we sold this for $20.
Yeah.
Because it was supposed to be a promotional thing. And then they sold so fast that we couldn't just be like a couple months later, oh, we're reprinting it. Now we have to bump it up to 35. And then we never did. And ooh, that was always kind of embarrassment a little bit. Oh,
but it worked. I mean, sometimes you go in with a starter product with a low price point. If that's not, you're growing your customer base, and and of course the D, that plus it was a great system. It was well priced. It was beautiful, and then we put the D20 initiative on top of it, and it really was a huge success.
Oh, I remember so many people. Oh, I was showing this. People probably didn't see this. The leatherette thing.
Yes.
Still got that. That the D20 system was amazing. I mean, it really upended the industry in a lot of ways, but it was why, in a lot of ways, I think that D&D succeeded long term, because it goes back again to what I was saying, that you impressed upon me, the idea that a rising tide floats all boats. We just gave companies like Fantasy Flight Games, for example, which now does terrific board games. They started out by doing D20 product. That's where they raised their money, so they could do the board games. I'm not trying to speak for them, but
right. Well, and Green Ronin and AG was in on it for a while. White Wolf was in on it for a while. Everybody was doing D20 products for a while until the Glut, which it wasn't so good for a lot of people. It
started some fortunes and it broke some fortunes, but we all know that the best way to make a lot of money in the game industry is to start with a lot more money.
Or meet Richard Garfield.
Or
So hey, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes before we want to go into kind of like talking about what you've done since D&D. So basically, like, what's one more story that you'd like to tell from the Wizards era working on D&D?
Oh man, one more. There are so many. One of the things though that I have to talk about, mostly because I brought the prop, was it was so exciting to be part of Dungeons and Dragons at TSR, even if it was only for the last couple of years, and then go to Wizards, because I feel like I'm part of the third edition history. I have written something for every edition of D&D, except oddly enough, fifth edition, because newest. And that's exciting. And that's why I wanted to remind you of this.
Yes.
The book that we worked on together. I mean, it wasn't just us. There were a lot of people involved, but 30 Years of Adventure was for the 30th anniversary. And you and I got to sit down together and talk about stories and anecdotes, and other members of the team did the same. And we went and we got people from, like, this was when we got people like Vin Diesel and other people from Hollywood to tell their stories about playing D&D. And I think it was the first time anybody really started thinking, oh yeah, there are all these celebrities and all these famous people who play role-playing games and miniatures games. And I remember sitting at your table talking about what anecdotes are we going to share? What anecdotes are we not going to share? There were a few of those.
There certainly were.
And that gave me the opportunity to really look at the history of D&D, from the beginning and going forward, and where things were headed, which in a way kind of shaped what I ended up doing with my career. So, I mean, as much as I'd love to talk about like my first experience at Gen Con and all these other things, that one is the story that really shapes things. I remember. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I got to add two quick things about that book, 30 Years of Adventure. One is I was really proud. It's the only time in my life that I wrote for somebody other than one of my own companies. Like when somebody from another company asked me to get another company, being Wizards of the Coast, but I wasn't there anymore. So I left Wizards of the Coast. And I think it's the only thing Wizards has asked me to do since I left Wizards of the Coast but it was to write part of that book with you, and I think Steve Winter, Harold Johnson, I think the other people that worked on it.
Yeah, God, if you couldn't find somebody, those guys know what they're talking about.
Oh my gosh, they sure
Yeah.
do. And the other thing, I was trying to remember, were you at the promotional
Yep.
party for that
Hmm.
book in New York?
Yeah.
Did
There's a.
you
Go
do
ahead.
you remember me remember the encounter I had with the reporter from High Times?
Yes, I do. I was sitting there with Liz Shue, who was one of the brand managers at the time, and we're like, do we need to do something about that? You know?
Well,
And we're like, well, no, we don't need to
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
We
Well,
don't need to do anything.
this is probably this. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but it's best when
Eh,
you tell stories you're not supposed to tell. But this guy, there was a reporter there from High Times, and I don't know, well into the party at some point, he just kind of announced
oh
the
yeah.
kind of room in general. Says, "Well, I am from High Times, and I think it's kind of obligatory that I offer anybody who'd like to join me on the balcony to smoke a joint." And everybody was just like, "Oh my god!" Except for me, I went out and
Yeah.
smoked a joint with him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, sure, it would be disrespectful not
Yeah.
for nobody to go out and so now I'm living in Washington, it's legal here in Washington, so it's okay to tell the story.
Yeah.
But I got quoted. He mentioned me
Hmm.
in High Times magazine, so that's one of the few memorial pieces I have is the issue of High Times magazine with my name in it.
Well, yeah, I actually ended up talking to him a little bit later, and he said that they actually at they had kind of a policy when they would be invited to go do press events, they would bring stuff along, and if nobody was interested, then they were like, well, maybe we don't really want to write about your stuff, so you
Oh,
probably ended
so
up
you
getting
see,
us featured. Yeah,
I didn't know that part of it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so maybe Wizards wouldn't have gotten that really important press coverage from my
That's right.
Times magazine, except
Yeah,
for me taking one for the team
that's right.
and
That event
going there.
was really funny in a certain way because it was at a loft in New York
Yeah,
City,
yeah,
and it was really great. Had a lot of fun. Uh, Wizards actually let me bring Jill, my wife, out
yep.
for it, which I thought was
Right.
really classy. But like 2 weeks later, I had to go out to promote Atari games because if you remember at the time, Atari was doing all of our computer games, and I was working with them on several titles, and they were promoting a few of them.
Right.
One who had Patrick Stewart's voice in it. I'm trying to remember. I think it was called Demon Stone, uh, and it was in the exact same loft.
Huh. Funny. That's
Which,
great.
yeah, just I mean,
Huh.
not nearly as funny a story as yours, but it was just kind of weird. I was like, wait a minute, I've been here
So
before.
So we've got about 5 minutes for
Mhm.
you to catch our audience up on what have you done since in the last 20 since you left Wizards.
Yeah.
What are you doing now? Because I love this question because I know what you're doing now is pretty freaking cool.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, not too long after you left Wizards and, we finished third edition and 3.5, I started working with a lot of the computer licensees. And
Yeah.
I told you the 30 years of adventure started making me think about what's the historical significance of this? What am I going to do next? And, I'd been a designer, a writer, creative director, all those sorts of things. And I didn't see myself really doing anything else at Wizards. Not that I didn't enjoy working at Wizards, I did. Um,
I
but I,
came to the same conclusion. That's why, yeah.
yeah, it was time to do something different.
Right,
And
right.
a friend of mine, Dave Williams, was working at a startup company called Red 5 Studios down in California. Oh, looks like my cat is going to make an appearance. Come on.
Oh,
Oh,
good. I was hoping your
oh,
cat would come in and
come
say
on,
hi.
buddy. Come on, Oblin. He's Oblin. He wants to say hi.
All right.
Anyway,
That's counting against your 5 minutes. Your
that's
cat is.
right. Yeah. Well, anyway, so I ended up joining Red 5 Studios as a lead writer on a game called Firefall, which I'm not sure it ever actually released. It sort of went into beta or something like that. But I worked on that for about 3 years in California. Then after I left them, I ended up moving to Texas, of all places, to work at a company called Vigil Games. They were part of THQ. And we were working on the Warhammer 40K license. And
Wow. Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, at the time, my mother got kind of sick and she ended up passing away. And so I wanted to move out to the East Coast, and I ran into Zeb Cook,
Oh
uh,
yeah, Zeb,
who, yeah, he had worked at
designer second
TSR and
edition.
everything. Yeah, yeah. And he had actually talked to me earlier about joining Zenimax Online Studios to work on an MMO, but I ended up going to Vigil, and I ran into him again, and I said, "Hey, is that opportunity still open? Because you're on the East Coast. My dad is on the East Coast. I'd like to be closer to family and everything." And he's like, "Yeah, sure, come on out." And so that was, geez, 9 years ago now. I joined as a designer, because my heart was always in design. I could do the writing, I can still write, but I like doing the design work. And so I started as a designer. I became a senior designer working on Elder Scrolls Online. And
Yeah,
for those of
there
you
it
who are
is.
familiar with Elder Scrolls, Skyrim, that sort of thing, we're the online version. And, we worked to make our game as strong as we could. And when we released, uh, it was good. It
Yeah,
was solid,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it wasn't what we had hoped. And
Right.
but we were going to release on console as well. So we saw ourselves as having a kind of a second chance. And we worked really hard to improve the game. And Zenimax Media, that are owned by Bethesda and everything, the whole big group, they backed us up. They said, you can make this. You got some good stuff here. So we worked really hard, and we have been growing our audience ever since then. The game has been out for more than 5 years now. I think we're just hitting our 6th-year anniversary, and we keep adding to it. We are one of the
Yeah,
few companies
yeah.
that has regular release schedules. And in fact, I am now a zone lead, which means I get to sort of head up a release.
Which
And
zone? Which zone are you lead on?
the most recent one is Greymoor. It is a
Greymoor.
return to Skyrim. You're going to get to go to Western Skyrim and the mysterious Blackreach, which is like a
Ooh,
subterranean
right.
area. On May 26th, it's going to be out for PC. On June 9th, we're going to be coming out for PS4 and Xbox One. It's available. You can actually go and you can play on our test servers right now for free if you want. But if you haven't started the game yet, I strongly recommend
So
jumping in with Greymoor.
I got to tell you, Elder Scrolls is the only MMO I've ever played, and
Really?
and I played it a fair amount. I got to like 20th level or something like that, and
Oh, wow.
but my dad loves it,
Oh,
and
great.
so he got me into it, and I played with him. He's slowing down, so he has trouble with it now because it's too fast, and and stuff for him. But I had a really good time playing with him during that time. I mean, I don't keep playing it because it's just the genre of MMOs. But if I was going to get, if I was going to play an MMO, I'd go back to that in a heartbeat.
Oh,
So
good.
well done. Well, I think
Thank
it's
you.
fantastic bragging rights to be a zone. What'd you say? A zone leader?
Zone lead.
Zone lead.
It's very similar to what we had as the product managers or creative directors, in that basically I'll be in charge of the Greymoor zone, and then
Yeah.
I'll move over to like work on like live team stuff and prep for a new zone, whereas we have another zone lead who will take on the next challenge,
Right.
and we basically
Right.
sort of rotated in. But
Well, that's great.
I will say, tell your dad, for Greymoor, if you guys can get together and play, we're putting out a new system. It's called the Antiquities system, where it's based on searching for, antiquities, relics, and stuff in the
Oh,
game.
I'll tell
And
him now. He'll be excited. He'll think it has something to do with Magic the Gathering, the Antiquities expansion, and he'll be all in. Hey,
that's,
I got to cut you off there because I
oh
want to
yeah.
ask one more question before we run out of time.
Hmm.
I feel like working with Third Edition D&D was such a moment in history. I
Oh
feel,
God, yeah.
So when you look back on that era, what do you take with you from that?
I take from me the critical ability to put data in front of passion, but to let passion drive the product. Everybody I worked with at TSR and Wizards was passionate about their job, about what they wanted to do. But when we got to Wizards and we started working on stuff and play testing things for Third Edition, we didn't just let her like, no, I like this, so it's got to be in the game. We would be like, well, what do other people think about it? How does it affect the game as a whole?
Right.
And I've really taken that to heart, and it's very important in a computer game, because you can't just spin off and do all this extraneous stuff. You just end up making more work for everybody, because it's not just like, I can't just write something and be like, okay, it's in the game, no repercussions. If I do something, then artists, animators, sound designers, everybody has to work on it. And so
Right.
letting your data inform your ideas. It may not sound sexy, but you can still be passionate about this stuff, but be smart. Only put things in the game that are gonna make it better. And
Yeah.
that's what I learned
Yeah.
working at Wizards.
What I hear is be passionate, but listen to the customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're ultimately designing something for somebody to play. And if it's not fun, they're not going to play it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, Ed, our time has drawn to a close.
Because
Like
I
we
ramble.
said, 1 hour. We just barely scratched the surface.
Uh,
Thank you so much for being on our show. Really,
Peter,
really appreciate it.
Peter, it's been an honor being on the show. It's been an honor to know you all these years, and I really appreciate you letting me come, bend your ear. I hope I can talk to you again sometime in person, because
Yes.
so many stories we didn't get to share.
Yeah.
And I just know that working at TSR and Wizards was one of the high points of my career and my life, and certainly you were a big part of that.
No, thank you so much. All right, well, everybody, okay, that wraps up another issue of Fireside with Peter. An issue, yeah, sure, an issue of Fireside with Peter Adkison. Our guest next week will be Steve Winter, whose name came up in our conversation today, and in most conversations we have on this show since we started talking about D&D. He's a god, let's just put it that way. But that won't be until next week. In the meantime, stick around. Tonight we have the Westgate Irregulars, our local authors playing D&D in their worlds at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Friday, 2 p.m. we have table takes. At 3:30 we have round table discussions. Monday, 6 p.m. we have board games with the Brothers Murph, and then the Brothers Murph come back Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. for minis with the Murphs, and then at 11 a.m. on Wednesday we have board games with This Game Gets Dicey, and then finally Wednesday at 4 p.m. it's back with me and our guest Steve Winter. Check out the pod site for Fireside. This week's Fireside episode we just had with Ed Stark will be released on Friday, and we are releasing archives of the first 2 seasons where we talk about Magic the Gathering on Mondays. So please remember to follow us, subscribe, turn on your notifications, share, talk about us, help us increase the bandwidth for this. And if you miss a show, you can find all of our streams on YouTube just one day later. So thank you for watching us. Thank you for everybody who helped put on the show. Thanks to Ed Stark, our guest, our technical director, Marcus Mays, our streaming manager, Lauren Bond, our producer, Derek Guter, and thanks to Gen Con TV for streaming us. And thank you for watching.